The three-line rifle M1891, Russian, 1891, Trioklinina Vintovka Obrazca 1891 Goda, colloquially known as Mosin Nagant, Russian, ISO 9, Vintovka Mosina, is a 5-shot, bolt-action, internal magazine-fed, military rifle developed from 1882 to 1891, and used by the armed forces of the Russian Empire, the Soviet Union and various other nations. It is one of the most mass-produced military bolt-action rifles in history, with over 37 million units having been made since its inception in 1891, and, in spite of its age, it has been used in various conflicts around the world up to the modern day. History. Initial design and tests. During the Russo-Ottoman War of 1877–1878, Russian troops armed mostly with Burden single-shot rifles suffered heavy casualties against Turkish troops equipped with Winchester repeating rifles, particularly at the bloody siege of Pleven. This showed Russian commanders the need to modernize the general infantry weapon of the army. Various weapons were acquired and tested by Gao of the Ministry of Defense of Russian Empire, and in 1889 the Lebel M1886 was obtained through semi-official channels from France. It was supplied together with a model of the cartridge and bullet, but without the primer and the smokeless powder. Those problems were solved by Russian scientists and engineers. The smokeless powder, for instance, was produced by Dmitry Mendeleev himself. In 1889, 3 rifles were submitted for evaluation. Captain Sergei Ivanovich Mosin of the Imperial Army submitted his 3-line caliber, .30 calories, 7.62 mm, rifle. Belgian designer Leon Nagant submitted a 3.5 line, .35 caliber, 9 mm, design, and a Captain Zinoviev submitted another 3-line design, 1 line equals 110 in or 2.54 mm, thus 3 lines equals 7.62 mm. When trials concluded in 1891, the evaluators were split in their assessment. The main disadvantages of Nagant's rifle were a more complicated mechanism and a long and tiresome procedure of disassembling, which required special instruments. It was necessary to unscrew 2 fasteners. Mosin's rifle was mainly criticized for its lower quality of manufacture and materials, due to artisan pre-production of his 300 rifles. The commission initially voted 14-10 to approve Nagant's rifle. At this point the decision was made to rename the existing commission and call it Commission for Creation of the Small Bore Rifle, and to put on paper the final requirements for such a rifle. The inventors obliged by delivering their final designs. Head of the commission, General Chagin, ordered subsequent tests held under the commission's supervision, after which the bolt action of Mosin's design was ordered into production under the name of 3-line rifle M1891, 1891. Technical detail. Like the 1898 Mauser rifle, the 1891 Mosin uses 2 front locking lugs to lock up the action. However, the Mosin's lugs lock in the horizontal position, whereas the Mauser locks vertically. The Mosin bolt body is multi-piece whereas the Mauser is one piece. The Mosin uses interchangeable bolt heads like the Lee Enfield. Unlike the Mauser, which uses a controlled feed bolt head in which the cartridge base snaps up under the fixed extractor as the cartridge is fed from the magazine, the Mosin has a push-feed recessed bolt head in which the spring-loaded extractor snaps over the cartridge base as the bolt is finally closed, similar to the Cure 88 and M91 Carcano or modern sporting rifles like the Remington 700. Like the Mauser, the Mosin uses a blade ejector mounted in the receiver. The Mosin bolt is removed by simply pulling it fully to the rear of the receiver and squeezing the trigger, while the Mauser has a bolt stop lever separate from the trigger. Like the Mauser, the bolt lift arc on the Mosin Nagant is 90 degrees, versus 60 degrees on the Lee Enfield. The Mauser bolt handle is at the rear of the bolt body and locks behind the solid rear receiver ring. The Mosin bolt handle is similar to the Mannlicher. It is attached to a protrusion on the middle of the bolt body, which serves as a bolt guide, and it locks protruding out of the ejection/loading port in front of a split rear receiver ring, also serving a similar function to Mauser's third or safety lug. The rifling of the Mosin barrel is right turning, clockwise looking down the rifle, 4 groove with a twist of 1:9.5 or 1:10. The 5-round fixed metallic magazine can either be loaded by inserting the cartridges singly, or more often in military service, by the use of 5-round stripper clips. Refinement and production. The 3-line rifle, Model 1891, its original official designation, was adopted by the Russian military in 1891. There have been several variations from the original rifle, the most common being the M1891/30, commonly referred to as the 91/30 by shooters, which was a modernized design introduced in 1930. Some details were borrowed from Nagant's design. One such detail is the attachment of the magazine spring to the magazine base plate. In Mosin's original design, the spring was not attached to the base plate and, according to the Commission, could be lost during cleaning. Another detail is the form of the clip that could hold 5 cartridges to be loaded simultaneously into the magazine. Another detail is the form of the interrupter, a specially designed part within the receiver, which helps prevent double feeding. The initial rifle proposed by Mosin lacked an interrupter, leading to numerous failures to feed. This detail was introduced in the rifle borrowing from Nagant's rifle. Although the form of the interrupter was slightly changed, this alteration was subsequently borrowed back by the Commission for the Model 1891 Mosin Nagant. During the modernization of 1930, the form of the interrupter was further changed, from a single piece to a 2-piece design, as the part had turned out to be one of the least reliable parts of the action. Only the clip loading cartridges and the attachment of the magazine spring to the magazine base plate in subsequent models were designed by Nagant. Considering the rifle could be easily loaded without using a clip, one cartridge after another, the magazine spring attached to the magazine base plate is the only contribution of Nagant to all rifles after 1930. Nagant's legal dispute. Despite the failure of Nagant's rifle, he filed a patent suit, claiming he was entitled to the sum the winner was to receive. It appeared that Nagant was the first to apply for the international patent protection over the interrupter, although he borrowed it from Mosin's design initially. Mosin could not apply for a patent since he was an officer of the Russian army, and the design of the rifle was owned by the government and had the status of a military secret. A scandal was about to burst out, with Nagant threatening he would not participate in trials held in Russia ever again, and some officials proposing to expel Nagant from any further trials as he borrowed the design of the interrupter after it was covered by the secrecy status given in Russia of that time to military inventions and therefore violated Russian law. Taking into consideration that Nagant was one of the few producers not engaged by competitive governments and generally eager to cooperate and share experience and technologies, the Commission paid him a sum of 200,000 Russian rubles, equal to the premium that Mosin received as the winner. The rifle did not receive the name of Mosin, because of the personal decision taken by Tsar Alexander III, which was made based on the opinion of the defense minister Pyotr Vanovsky. There are parts in this newly created design, invented by Colonel Rogovtsev, by Light General Chaggin's commission, Captain Mosin and small arms manufacturer Nagant. Therefore it is only fair to call it Russian 3-line rifle M1891. The Tsar himself dashed the word Russian from this document with his own hand. This turned out to be a wise decision, as Leon Nagant remained the major contractor for the Russian government, and in 1895, Nagant's revolver was adopted by the Russian army as the main sidearm. However, for the same reason and because of Nagant's attempts to use the situation for publicity, the Mosin Nagant name appeared in the Western literature. The rifle was never called this in Russia. The name is a misnomer from the legal point of view, taking into consideration the legal provisions of Russian law at that time, i.e. the law of the country to adopt the rifle, and from technical point of view, as none of the details borrowed from Nagant's design, even if removed, would prevent the rifle from firing. Moreover, from the technical point of view, the rifle that came to be called Mosin Nagant, or Nagant Mosin, is the design proposed by Mosin, as further amended by Mosin with some details being borrowed from Nagant's design. Production of the Model 1891 began in 1892 at the ordnance factories of Tula Arsenal, Izhevsk Arsenal, and Etsestroyetsk Arsenal. An order for 500,000 rifles was placed with the French arms factory, Manufacture Nationale d'Armes de Châtellerault. Russo-Japanese War. In 1889 Tsar Nicholas ordered the Russian army to meet or exceed European standards in rifle developments with rifles of reduced caliber and cartridges with smokeless powder. The new weapons would entail high velocities, exceeding 600 meters per second, 2,000 feet/s, and would result in land battles both commencing and being capable of being fought at longer ranges, nearly 2 kilometers. The new Mosin rifles would replace the Burden rifles then in use by the Russian army. The Russo-Japanese War, 1904–1905, was the Mosin Nagant M1891 rifle's first major blooding, and by the time the war broke out in 1904, approximately 3,800,000 Mosin Nagant M1891 rifles had been built, with over 1.5 million in the hands of the Russian cavalry and all of his reserves when hostilities commenced. However, few M1891s saw combat in the conflict. Most Russian units in the Far East were still armed with Burden rifles. Between the adoption of the final design in 1891 and the year 1910, several variants and modifications to the existing rifles were made. World War I. With the start of World War I, production was restricted to the M1891 Dragoon and infantry models for the sake of simplicity. Due to the desperate shortage of arms and the shortcomings of a still developing domestic industry, the Russian government ordered 1.5 million M1891 infantry rifles from Remington Arms and another 1.8 million from New England Westinghouse Company in the United States in 1915. Remington produced 750,000 rifles before production was halted by the 1917 October Revolution. Deliveries to Russia had amounted to 469,951 rifles when the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk ended hostilities between the Central Powers and Russia. Henceforth, the new Bolshevik regime of Vladimir Lenin cancelled payments to the American companies manufacturing the Mosin Nagant. Russia had not paid for the order at any time throughout the Great War. With Remington and Westinghouse on the precipice of bankruptcy from the Communists' decision, the remaining 280,000 rifles were purchased by the United States Army. American and British expeditionary forces of the North Russia campaign were armed with these rifles and sent to Murmansk and Arkhangelsk in the late summer of 1918 to prevent the large quantities of munitions delivered for Tsarist forces from being captured by the Central Powers. Remaining rifles were used for the training of U.S. Army troops. Some were used to equip U.S. National Guard, SATC, and ROTC units. Designated U.S. Rifle, 7.62 mm, model of 1916, these are among the rarest of American service arms. In 1917, 50,000 rifles were sent via Vladivostok to the Czechoslovak legions in Siberia to aid in their attempt to secure passage to France. Many of the New England Westinghouse and Remington Mosin Nagants were sold to private citizens in the United States before World War II through the Office of the Director of Civilian Marksmanship, the predecessor to the federal government's current civilian marksmanship program. Large numbers of Mosin Nagants were captured by German and Austro-Hungarian forces and saw service with the rear echelon forces of both armies, and also with the Imperial German Navy. Many of these weapons were sold to Finland in the 1920s. Civil War, modernization, and wars with Finland. During the Russian Civil War, infantry and dragoon versions were still in production, though in dramatically reduced numbers. The rifle was widely used by Bolsheviks, blackguards, and their enemies, the White Russians, counter-revolutionary forces. In 1924, following the victory of the Red Army, a committee was established to modernize the rifle, which had by then been in service for over 3 decades. This effort led to the development of the Model 91/30 rifle, which was based on the design of the original Dragoon version. The barrel length was shortened by 7 cm, 2.8 in. The sight measurements were converted from arshins to meters, and the front sight blade was replaced by a hooded post front sight less susceptible to being knocked out of alignment. There were also minor modifications to the bolt, but not enough to prevent interchangeability with the earlier Model 1891 and the so-called Cossack Dragoon rifles. Finland was a Grand Duchy in the Russian Empire until 1917, so Finns had long used the Mosin Nagant in service with the Tsarist military. The rifle was used in the short civil war there and adopted as the service rifle of the new Republic's army. Finland produced several variants of the Mosin Nagant, all of them manufactured using the receivers of Russian-made or, later, Soviet-made rifles. Finland also utilized a number of captured M91 and M91/30 rifles with minimal modifications. As a result, the rifle was used on both sides of the Winter War and the Continuation War during World War II. Finnish Mosin Nagants were produced by Sacco, Tikkakoski, and VKT, with some using barrels imported from Switzerland and Germany. In assembling M39 rifles, Finnish armourers reused octagonal receivers that dated back as far as 1894. Finnish rifles are characterized by Russian, French, or American-made receivers stamped with a boxed SA, as well as many other parts produced in those countries and barrels produced in Finland, Switzerland, Austria, Belgium, and Germany. The Finns also manufactured two-piece finger splice stocks for their Mosin Nagant rifles. In addition, the rifle was distributed as aid to Republican anti-Franco forces in the Spanish Civil War. Spanish Civil War Mosins can be readily identified by the wire sling hangers inserted in the slots in the forearm and buttstock meant to take the Russian dog collars for Russian-style slings, so the rifles could accept Western European-style rifle slings. World War II. At the beginning of the war, the Mosin Nagant 91/30 was the standard issue weapon of Soviet troops and millions of the rifles were produced and used in World War II by the largest mobilized army in history. The Mosin Nagant Model 1891/30 was modified and adapted as a sniper rifle from 1932 onwards with mounts and scopes from Germany at first and subsequently with domestic designs, PE, PEM, and from 1942 was issued with 3.5 power PU fixed focus scopes to Soviet snipers. It served quite prominently in the brutal urban battles on the Eastern Front, such as the Battle of Stalingrad, which made heroes of snipers like Vasily Zaitsev and Ivan Sidorenko. These sniper rifles were highly respected for being very rugged, reliable, accurate, and easy to maintain. Finland also employed the Mosin Nagant as a sniper rifle, with similar success with their own designs and captured Soviet rifles. For example, Simo Häyhä is credited with having killed 505 Soviet soldiers, many of whom fell victim to his Finnish M/2830 Mosin Nagant rifle. Häyhä did not use a scope on his Mosin. In interviews Häyhä gave before his death, he said that the scope and mount designed by the Soviets required the shooter to expose himself too much and raise his head too high, increasing the chances of being spotted by the enemy. In 1935–1936, the 91/30 was again modified, this time to lower production time. The hex receiver, actually octagonal, was changed to a round receiver. When war with Germany broke out, the need to produce Mosin Nagants in vast quantities led to a further simplification of machining and a falling off in finish of the rifles. The wartime Mosins are easily identified by the presence of tool marks and rough finishing that never would have passed the inspectors in peacetime. However, despite a lack of both aesthetic focus and uniformity, the basic functionality of the Mosins was unimpaired. In addition, in 1938, a carbine version of the Mosin Nagant, the M38, was issued. The carbine used the same cartridge and action as other Mosins, but the barrel was shortened by 21.6 cm, 8.5 in, to bring the weapon down to an overall length of 101.6 cm, 40.0 in, with the forearm shortened in proportion. The idea was to issue the M38 to troops such as combat engineers, signal corps, and artillerymen, who could conceivably need to defend themselves from sudden enemy advances, but whose primary duties lay behind the front lines. Significantly, the front sight of the M38 was positioned in such a way that the Model 91/30's cruciform bayonet could not be mounted to the muzzle even if a soldier obtained one. An increase in urban combat led directly to the development of the Model M44 Mosin. In essence, The M44 is an M38 with a slightly modified forearm and with a permanently mounted cruciform bayonet that folds to the right when it is not needed. In terms of handiness, the M44 was an improvement on the Model 9130s, particularly for urban warfare, but few M44s saw combat on the Eastern Front. By the end of the war, approximately 13 million M91/30 rifles had been produced. Increased worldwide use. In the years after World War II, the Soviet Union ceased production of all Mosin Nagants and withdrew them from service in favor of the SKS series carbines and eventually the AK series rifles. Despite its increasing obsolescence, the Mosin Nagant saw continued service throughout the Eastern Bloc and the rest of the world for many decades to come. Mosin Nagant rifles and carbines saw service on many fronts of the Cold War, from Korea and Vietnam to Afghanistan and along the Iron Curtain in Europe. They were kept not only as reserve stockpiles, but frontline infantry weapons as well. Virtually every country that received military aid from the Soviet Union, China, and Eastern Europe during the Cold War used Mosin Nagants at various times. Middle Eastern countries within the sphere of Soviet influence, Egypt, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, and Palestinian fighters have received them in addition to other more modern arms. Mosin Nagants have also seen action in the hands of both Soviet and Mujahideen forces in Afghanistan during the Soviet Union's occupation of the country during the 1970s and the 1980s. Their use in Afghanistan continued on well into the 1990s and the early 21st century by Northern Alliance forces. Even after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Mosin Nagants are still commonly found on modern battlefields around the world. They were used by insurgent forces in the Iraq War and the war in Afghanistan. Mosin Nagant rifles have even been seen in the present conflict of the Syrian civil war, in the hands of rebels. Separatists have also used the rifles alongside more modern Russian firearms in the Second War in Chechnya. In addition, scoped Mosins continue to serve as issue sniper rifles with the Afghan army, the Iraqi army, the Finnish army, and with a micrometer sight as a sniper training and precision target rifle with the Finns. Mosin Nagants have been used by both pro-Russian separatists and pro-Ukrainian forces in the ongoing conflict in eastern Ukraine. Considering sniper rifles as part of a national army's weapons, the Mosin Nagant is the longest continuously serving rifle in history, at more than 120 years. However, the Mosin Nagant is not the longest continuously serving firearm used in combat issued by a government, as the Brown Bess musket was in use from 1720 through about 1865 within the British Empire. Variants: Russia/USSR. Model 1891 infantry rifle, Russian, 1891. The primary weapon of Russian and Red Army infantry from 1891 to 1930. Between 1891 and 1910 the following modifications were made to the design of the rifle. Changed sights. Inclusion of a reinforcing bolt through the finger groove, due to the adoption of a 147 grain pointed Spitzer round. Elimination of the steel finger rest behind the trigger guard. New barrel bands. Installation of slot-type sling mounts to replace the more traditional swivels. Dragoon rifle, Russian, intended for use by dragoons, 64 mm, 2.5 in, shorter and 0.4 kg, 0.9 pounds, lighter than the M1891. The Dragoon rifle's dimensions are identical to the later M1891/30 rifle, and most Dragoon rifles were eventually reworked into M1891/30s. Most such rifles, known to collectors as ex-Dragoons, can be identified by their pre-1930 date stampings, but small numbers of Dragoon rifles were produced from 1930 to 1932 and after reworking became impossible to distinguish from purpose-built M1891/30s. Cossack rifle, introduced for Cossack horsemen, it is almost identical to the Dragoon rifle but is sighted for use without a bayonet. These rifles were also issued without a bayonet. Model 1907 carbine, at 289 mm, 11.4 in, shorter and 0.95 kg, 2.1 pounds, lighter than the M1891. This model was excellent for cavalry, engineers, signalers, and artillerymen. It was stocked nearly to the front sight and therefore did not take a bayonet. It was produced until at least 1917 in small numbers. Model 1891/30, 1891/30, the most prolific version of the Mosin Nagant. It was produced for standard issue to all Soviet infantry from 1930 to 1945. Most dragoon rifles were also converted to the M1891/30 standard. It was commonly used as a sniper rifle in World War II. Early sniper versions had a 4x PE or PEM scope, a Soviet-made copy of a Zeiss design, while later rifles used smaller, simpler, and easier to produce 3.5x PU scopes. Because the scope was mounted above the chamber, the bolt handle was replaced with a longer-handled, bent version on sniper rifles, known to Mosin collectors and shooters as a bent bolt, so the shooter could work the bolt without the scope interfering with it. Like the US M1903A4 Springfield sniper rifle, the location of the scope above the receiver prevents the use of stripper clips. Its design was based on the dragoon rifle with the following modifications: flat rear sights and restamping of sights in meters, instead of R shiny eye. A cylindrical receiver, replacing the octagonal, commonly called hex, receiver. Early production 91/30s, from 1930 to 1936, and converted dragoon rifles retained the octagonal receiver. These rifles are less common and regarded as generally more desirable by collectors. A hooded post front sight, replacing the blade on previous weapons. Model 1938 carbine, a carbine based on the M1891/30 design that was produced from 1939 to 1945 at the Izhevsk Arsenal and in 1940 and 1944 at Tula. They were intended for use by second echelon and non-combatant troops. Very few M38 carbines were made in 1945 and are highly sought after by collectors. Essentially a M1891/30 with a shortened barrel and shortened stock, the M38 is 1000 mm, 40 in overall length versus 1230 mm, 48 in overall length for the Model 91/30. This carbine did not accept a bayonet and was in fact designed so that the standard Model 91/30 bayonet would not fit it. However, many M38 carbines were fitted into M44 stocks by the Soviets as a wartime expedient. M38s in the correct M38 stock command a premium over M38s in M44 pattern stocks. The M38 was replaced by the M44 carbine in 1944. Model 1944 carbine. This carbine was introduced into service in late 1944, with 50,000 service test examples produced in 1943, and remained in production until 1948. They were produced from 1943 to 1948 at the Izhevsk Arsenal and only 1944 at Tula. Its specifications are very similar to the M1938, with the unique addition of a permanently affixed, side-folding cruciform spike bayonet. A groove for the folded bayonet is inlet into the right side of the stock. These were in use not only by the Soviet Union, but also its various satellite nations. Many of these were counterbeard post-war. Model 1891/59 carbine, commonly called 91/59s, the M1891/59s were created by shortening M1891/30 rifles to carbine length, with rear sight numbers partially ground off to reflect reduced range. These rifles are almost clones of the M38 except for the ground-off M91/30 rear sight. The 1891/59 marking on the receiver suggests the carbines were created in or after 1959. It was initially thought that Bulgaria or another Soviet satellite country performed the conversions in preparation for a Western invasion that never came. Recent evidence suggests that the M91/59 was indeed produced in Bulgaria from Soviet-supplied wartime production M91/30s. Total production of the 91/59s is uncertain. Figures as low as 1 million and as high as 3 million have appeared in firearm literature. Obrez, the sawed-off rifle. During the Russian Revolution and subsequent Civil War, revolutionaries, various irregular forces and common criminals cut down the Mosin Nagant rifles to pistol size for easy concealment. Most of these rifle-caliber pistols were crudely made and lacked sights. After the revolution, the numbers of Obrez bolt-action pistols decreased as the Bolsheviks took over the imperial arsenals and gained access to stocks of Model 1895 Nagant revolvers. This unofficial Mosin variant is perhaps the rarest Mosin of them all. Obrez pistols are highly prized by collectors. OTS-48/OTS-48K, the OTS-48/OTS-48K, 48, sniper rifle was designed around 2000 in an attempt to make use of many surplus Mosin M1891/30 rifles which were still held in storage in Russia. Developed and manufactured on order by Central Design Bureau for Sporting and Hunting Arms, Skibsu, in the city of Tula, this rifle is still in limited use by some Russian law enforcement agencies today. Estonia. After the Estonian War of Independence, Estonia had around 120,000 M/1891s in stock. Later the Kaitseliit, the Estonian National Guard, received some Finnish M28/30 rifles. A few modernized variants were also made by the Estonian Armory. M1933 or 1891/33 was standard rifle of Estonian Armed Forces. M1938, a further variant of M1933, 12,000 rifles. KL300, a variant for Kaitseliit, 4,025 were made. M1935 Lohende Tud Sojapus M1935, shortened rifle M1935 was a shortened variant of M1933 with 600 mm barrel, 6,770 rifles. Finland. Most Finnish rifles were assembled by Sako, Tikkakoski Oy, or VKT, Valshankiva States Rifle Factory, after wars part of Valshan Metallitet, Valmet, State Metal Works. The Finnish cartridge 7.62x53 mmR is a slightly modified variation of the Russian 7.62x54 mmR, and is considered interchangeable with 5.4R. However, the older version of the Finnish military cartridge was loaded with the S-type bullet that had nominal diameter of .308. In 1936 the Finnish army fielded a new standard service cartridge intended for both machine guns and rifles. This new cartridge was loaded with a new bullet designed in 1934, the D166, which had a nominal diameter of .310. The new service rifle M/39 was designed from the start around the D166, thus it had nominal barrel diameter of .310. Hand-loaded cartridges for Finnish rifles should however use a 0.308 inches, 7.8 mm, bullet for use with other Finnish Mosin Nagant variants instead of the 0.310 inches, 7.9 mm, one which gives best results in M39, Soviet and most of other Mosin Nagant rifles. M/91, when Finland achieved independence from Russia, large numbers of Model 1891 infantry rifles were already stockpiled in the ex-Russian military depots within Finland. As a result, the rifle was adopted as the standard Finnish army weapon, and surplus Mosin Nagants were purchased from other European nations which had captured them during World War I. These rifles were overhauled to meet Finnish army standards and designated M/91. In the mid-1920s Tikkakoski made new barrels for M/91s. Later, starting in 1940, Tikkakoski and VKT began production of new M/91 rifles. VKT production ceased in 1942 in favor of the newer M/39 rifle, but Tikkakoski production continued through 1944. The M/91 was the most widely issued Finnish rifle in both the Winter War and the Continuation War. M/91 RV, a cavalry rifle built from former Russian Model 1891 Dragoon rifles, modified with a sling slot based on the German Karabiner 98A. The original Russian sling slots were also retained. M/24, the Alata rifle, the Model 24 or Model 1891/24 was the first large-scale Mosin Nagant upgrade project undertaken by the Finnish Suojeluskunta, Civil Guard, and there were, in fact, three separate variations of the rifle. Barrels were produced by SIG, Schweizerische Industriegesellschaft, and by a German consortium. Swiss-produced barrels could be found in both standard Mosin Nagant 1891 contour and in a heavier contour designed for improved accuracy, while all German-produced barrels were heavyweight barrels. The initial contract for the SIG-produced barrels was let on April 10, 1923, and was for 3,000 new barrels pro.
Please subscribe and thanks for watching.